but they never promised us that it was going to be. With that, Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The gentlelady from Texas, and before she begins, I'd advise her side has 16 minutes and 50 seconds.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I rise today to speak about the August 2nd debt ceiling deadline and the proposal that will be before us very soon, developed by the Majority Leader Reid. Here we are again, debating legislation that demonstrates our fundamental differences in how we should run government. I want to quote from a recent article by Charles Krauthammer that appeared in the National Review, and I think that it says something that I've really been saying several times in the last week, that this is more than just a debt ceiling debate. It is a debate about our views of government that are so different between the parties in our country. And here's what Charles Krauthammer said. We're in the midst of a great 4-year national debate on the size and reach of government, the future of our welfare state, indeed the nature of the social contract between citizen and state. The distinctive visions of the two parties, social democratic versus limited government, have underlain every debate on every issue since Barack Obama's inauguration: the stimulus, the auto bailouts, health care reform, financial regulation, deficit spending, everything. The debt ceiling is but the latest focus of this fundamental divide. The sausage making, he says, may be unsightly. No argument there. But the problem is not that Washington is broken, as he describes it, that ridiculous, ubiquitous cliche. The problem is that these two visions are in competition, and the definitive popular verdict has not yet been rendered. He goes on to say we're only at the midpoint. Obama won a great victory in 2008 that he took as a mandate to transform America toward European-style social democracy. The subsequent counter-revolution delivered to that project a staggering rebuke in November of 2010. And so I think that really puts a perspective, Madam President, on the debates that we have been having in the last 2 years and the debate that we are seeing now in the last few weeks. I do know that none of us want our country to go into default. Both sides can agree on that. All of us are troubled with the delay in resolving this issue. Uncertainty is not good for our economy, but a bad agreement is worse because it will have lasting impact, and it is my opinion that it will also affect our debtors with a message that we're not serious about a $14 trillion debt, and we're not going to do anything that would try to bring it down or bring down the deficits or change the entitlement programs that are a major part, more than half, of our budget. I support Speaker Boehner's bill, and I support the Cut, Cap, and Balance Act. Both of these plans, in my opinion, contain the right approach to our budget challenges. I believe the Reid plan is the wrong approach. The Reid plan contains what they say is a $2.4 trillion debt limit increase, which, if enacted, would result in the single largest increase in the debt ceiling in the history of America. In addition to this unprecedented increase, the Reid plan fails to address our current fiscal imbalance. It doesn't do anything to address the fundamental problems. it lacks any adequate enforcement, and it doesn't ensure that long-term spending cuts are carried out. There is no guarantee at all. So you raise the debt limit and you don't have anything but a promise, and that's not good enough. It's not good enough for the elected leaders of our country, and it's certainly not good enough for the American public. The debt ceiling increase in the Reid plan is not paid for. Many of the cuts outlined in his plan are illusory or hopeful. Well, hope is not a strategy, Madam President. We can hope to do away with waste, fraud, and abuse. But we can't promise it right now because we don't have it before us. If we had a bill that cuts certain amounts from certain agencies because of waste, fraud, and abuse, that would be a commitment that we could uphold. But what we have is a promise that we'll look at it. How many times have we looked at waste, fraud, and abuse in our government programs? Yes, we ought to do it, but we should not make it the basis of lifting a debt ceiling that is crushing the economy in our country. To label $1 trillion of cuts as savings from leaving Afghanistan and Iraq, which Senator Reid's proposal does, is just not credible. For one thing, we don't know what the future obstacles in Afghanistan and Iraq are. And we've got to retain a certain level of stability on the ground in Afghanistan. And I have met with Afghan leaders and women just in the last couple of weeks, and they also agree that if America leaves precipitously without knowing what the stability on the ground is, and we certainly haven't seen stability lately with the assassinations of mayors and leaders, including the half-brother of the leader of Afghanistan, that's not stability. It doesn't say that they are ready yet. So having $1 trillion of cuts could undermine our national security. We don't know that we can count on that. I hope we can. I hope we can leave with the right circumstances on the ground, but that is the only criteria that we should use, and not cutting a budget that we know is a promise and not a commitment that we are assured that we can keep. Most disturbing of all in the Reid plan, the only possible justification for a $2.4 trillion increase in borrowing authority is to avoid doing this again before the 2012 elections. Madam President, that is not a reason to make public policy. Yes, none of us would want to go through this again in the next year. It has been painful for all sides. But just saying, well, we're going to do it with promises and hope for the future is certainly not a way to address a major policy issue, and it is not going to have the credibility with the American people. So, Madam President, I believe it would be irresponsible to give the President this unprecedented additional borrowing authority without requiring the enactment of significant spending reductions and reforms. To do so would send a worse signal to the markets across the world that are shaky right now looking at this debate. But they are also looking at what the result is going to be. And who is going to win the battle about how we run our government? Is it going to be another $2 trillion? Can you imagine, Madam President, a $16 trillion debt ceiling with no commitment to actually make the cuts that would start getting us on the right path? Madam President, that is not enough, and that's why we're here at 9:15 on Saturday night debating this issue, because we are not going to give up on our principles of making sure that the fiscal responsibility of our country will be worthy of a AAA rating, will be worthy of the assuredness that if you buy a bond or a Treasury note or invest in the United States of America, that it is a golden commitment, that you can count on it, that you can take it to the bank. That's what we are fighting for right now. And, Madam President, I hope so much that we can come to an agreement, because we all agree that defaulting on our debt would not be a good signal to the markets. But raising the debt ceiling without the assured cuts, without caps on future year spending, is unconscionable. Now, I would hope, going forward, that we would have a balanced budget amendment that would go to the states, because most states have a balanced budget in their constitutions, and they have mostly sound fiscal policies. If we had to live with those same constraints, I believe we would not get into this kind of a situation again. So I hope that eventually we will have a balanced budget amendment that we can get two-thirds vote for and send to the states and see if that isn't a worthy amendment to our great Constitution. But in the meantime, cut and cap is what we can do, and I hope we will. Thank you, Madam President, and I yield the floor.
Before this evening to refute some of the arguments that have been made by some of my colleagues, points that are important for the American people to understand, points that, if not clarified, could lead to a misunderstanding, lead to resentment, which is misplaced. One of the points that I've heard made this evening by one of my colleagues is that the debt limit issue has never been held hostage quite like it has now. I'm not quite sure what was meant by this, but I do want to clarify this point. If someone had held this hostage before, on any of the dozens and dozens of times that the debt limit has been raised over the course of many years, maybe it would have been a good thing. Maybe it would be a good thing for us not to be dealing right now with a national debt that has almost reached $15 trillion. Maybe we should consider the fact that those who are being held hostage are those who will one day have to repay this debt. Considering that some of those people are not yet here because they have yet to be born, and in some instances their parents have yet to meet. We have to ask the question whether they are being held hostage themselves. Held hostage to a government that always demands more money so that it can exercise more power over us. And as it acquires more power, exercises more of that over us, thus restricting our liberty, it demands more money. As it acquires more money, it exercises more power, and the process perpetuates itself. This is how we get to the point where we're almost $15 trillion in debt. This is how we get to the point where the American people are being held hostage. So if this process has not been held up in the past, then shame on those who could have held it but didn't. It's incumbent upon us who serve here and now to represent those who are sometimes underrepresented, to represent those most vulnerable members of society who are not yet old enough to vote or not yet born. This is a multi-generational problem. It's a multi-generational obligation that we're taking upon our entire country in connection with this debate. So if my colleague who made this point just about a half an hour ago meant that we should never have vigorous, aggressive debate and discussion over whether it's a good idea to take on $2.5 trillion in new debt in one fell swoop, perhaps we should revisit that assumption. Perhaps we ought to second-guess ourselves just a little bit more than we have in recent decades, lest we hold hostage an entire generation. Another point that was made by that same colleague is that Republicans have put forward plans to challenge, to undermine, to bring about immediate cuts to Social Security and Medicare. This simply isn't true. Quite to the contrary, the Cut, Cap, and Balance Act, of which I was the lead sponsor in the Senate before it was introduced in the House by my friend Jason Chaffetz, where it was later passed, the Cut, Cap, and Balance Act actually protected Social Security and Medicare. It bolstered, it strengthened those programs. So it is utterly false and I believe disingenuous for anyone to argue that that proposal, or any other that I'm aware of for that matter, would bring about cuts to Social Security and Medicare. This is not the point of this legislation. Quite to the contrary. The point of this legislation is to protect what we need to do through the U.S. government. Whether you are someone who would describe himself as a conservative and perhaps most concerned about national defense, or whether you are perhaps more liberal and you're most concerned about protecting our entitlement programs, you ought to agree with the principles underlying the cut, cap, and balance approach, with the fact that we need a balanced budget amendment. Because if we don't put these measures in place now, if we don't agree now that we need to restrict our borrowing authority, every one of these programs will be jeopardized. As we reached the mathematical, the economic borrowing capacity of the United States government, the more we borrow, the more we run into the risk that those who lend us money, those who buy our U.S. treasuries, will one day be unwilling to lend us more money, at least not without additional interest payments. We could very quickly go from spending about $250 billion a year in interest, as we now are, to spending something much closer to $1 trillion a year in interest, based on just a few interest rate points. As that goes up, our ability to fund everything goes down. In closing, Madam President, it's important to point out here that what's being requested here is the largest debt limit increase in American history, about $2.5 trillion. Unprecedented. The idea here is to give the U.S. Congress enough borrowing power to take us almost 2 years down the road. 2 years, by the way, that's roughly the amount of time that has elapsed since the Democrats in the Senate even introduced a budget. One has to ask, why extend the debt limit for such a long period of time? The President gave us the answer the other day. He wants to insulate himself from the political process. He wants to make it not a political issue. Political issues are themselves things that the voters are concerned about, as well they should be, because voters pay taxes. Voters are affected by the decisions we make. We need to have voters connected, not disconnected from this process. We need to act now, but we need to act responsibly, and the only way to do that is to raise the debt limit only after we pass the balanced budget amendment. Thank you, Madam President.
President.
The senator from Colorado.
Madam President, I'd ask unanimous consent that alternating blocks of time continue until 9:50 p.m., with the majority controlling the time until 9:20, the Republican side controlling the time until 9:50 p.m., and then the majority leader or designee be recognized.
Without objection, so ordered.
Madam President, I rise tonight, as I have for many weeks now, to call for a bipartisan solution to our deficits and debt, for us to bridge, to use a term we utilize in Colorado, the mountainous divide, in order to avoid defaulting on our obligations. Bipartisanship is a familiar theme in my home state of Colorado, and I know Coloradans agree with me that that's the only way forward. My constituents have been flooding my office with calls of frustration, urging me to keep fighting for a solution to this impending debt limit crisis that we face. They know the stakes are high, Madam President, and they know we've got to compromise to get something done. And as I've traveled my state over these summer months, I haven't found one single person in Colorado who's demanded more partisanship and more dysfunction. But here we are, seemingly on a Saturday night, with just that. My constituents, Coloradans, are searching for answers and solutions, yet all we seem to have here is more questions. And for the life of me, I just don't understand why, when our economy is still fragile, we're so close, it seems, to sentencing it to additional turmoil. Now, those who know me know that I'm not quick to anger or express frustration, but I just can't help but join Coloradans in looking at the situation that we're in with disbelief. We have hardworking and well-intentioned members from both parties who are willing to do the right thing for our country, but partisan bickering is seemingly continuing to artificially push our economy closer and closer, literally to the brink. Now, it's easy to chalk this up to a broken Washington, to say that Congress simply is unable to agree. But that ignores the truth. And that truth, Madam President, is a small minority of folks are bent on throwing sand in the gears of our legislative machinery. We extend a hand in the hopes of reaching an agreement, and then over and over again, this group rejects the idea of governing together and instead reaches for another handful of sand. The majority of us here don't agree with that. The majority of us in both parties do not want to default on our debt obligations. Madam President, it seems to me that our country's economic situation is like a patient that's just literally coming off life support. We're nursing our economy back to health. And the last thing we need is a self-induced heart attack. But that will happen in 3 days. In 3 days, we're set, our nation's set to default on its debt. And that's like an American family that would decide not to pay its bills or to quit making mortgage payments. Now, I know it's a natural inclination, perhaps, to not want to pay those bills. But Americans know there are consequences to default and that it's irresponsible to turn a blind eye on bills that come due. And it's important to note that these are bills that we already have incurred, that previous Congresses, in fact, this Congress, you could argue, has already voted for and therefore have incurred. And we've been here before. President Reagan raised the debt limit 18 times in order to enable the Treasury to pay our debts as they came due. They were routine. They were often voice votes. And when they were recorded votes, they were overwhelmingly in support of raising the debt limit so we could meet previous obligations. President George W. Bush raised it 7 times. There were no conditions put on the raising of our debt ceiling. Well, let me take a second and be clear. Raising the debt ceiling isn't something I want to do, and I'm sure anybody in the Senate is not all that keen to do it. But we do have those obligations. And a year and a half ago, I should say more accurately, I agreed with Republicans and fellow Democrats that we should take advantage of a discussion we had at the end of 2009 about raising the debt ceiling. And we should take advantage of that by putting in place real measures to reduce our debt. And I held out my vote at that time to raise the debt limit as a way to compel the White House to create a fiscal commission to address our long-term deficits and debt. And I was really pleased when President Obama created such a commission. He nominated 2 great Americans, Al Simpson, who was a senator in this very body, and former White House Chief of Staff Erskine Bowles, to head up the effort. I think, as we knew at the time, and we know even more now, these 2 men are patriots. They brought people together from both parties, and they came up with a $4 trillion plan. It's commonsensical to bring in and rein in our debt problems. And we applauded their efforts. Coloradans did. Americans all over the country did. They brought a common-sense approach, just like we would in our own personal finances. So when we approached our current debt limit this year and faced the possibility of defaulting on our debt, I joined members of both parties in urging us here in the Congress to do 2 things. First, to address our debt limit problem to prevent a first-ever and completely avoidable default so that America could and would pay its bills. And secondly, enact a comprehensive and bipartisan $4 trillion plan based on the Simpson-Bowles deficit reduction recommendation so that we'd get our fiscal house in order, I should say, for generations of Americans to come, but for those of us here today as well. Now, if you look back on this, this in some ways was unpopular. Folks on the far right and the far left began to sow seeds of division in order to prevent a compromise. People in our party, Madam President, objected to spending cuts and entitlement reforms, while Republican purists like Grover Norquist complained about increased revenues. And then that brings us to the events of the last several weeks. Those of us who support a common-sense middle ground and who believe our country's biggest national security threat is our growing national debt know that both sides need to compromise and that we need a long-term, comprehensive, bipartisan plan to truly heal the fiscal illnesses that have beset us. This is obvious just looking at the numbers, but and U.S. rating agencies began to question whether America was a credit-worthy nation. Can you imagine that? They began to ask, will America pay its bills? Will we be able to pay our bills, or will we go the way of an Ireland or a Greece and other financially destabilized nations? To me, the answer is clear. A broke nation is a weak nation. And if America is not only going to lead the global economic race, but win that race, as we know we can, as we've done throughout our history, we need to implement the Bowles-Simpson recommendations. And with that knowledge, a smart group of people from both parties began working out a way to do so. But there was one huge impediment. Literally hundreds of members of Congress signed a pledge promising not to touch the tax code, putting tax purity ahead of fiscal responsibility and deficit reduction. And even though the United States brought in a record low amount of revenue last year, what they insist we do would, whether intentionally or unintentionally, balance the budget on the backs of the middle class, the elderly, and the disenfranchised alone. And even though the Bowles-Simpson Commission recommended a blending of 75% spending cuts and 25% revenue increases, they seemingly, this small minority here in the Capitol, can't embrace any plan that includes additional revenue. Even though our tax code is littered with literally thousands of special interest tax breaks and corporate giveaways that do nothing to create jobs, they just can't embrace, it seems, tax reform. And even though a bipartisan plan would send a message to the markets that America is ready to lead and that Congress is capable of independent and thinking and problem solving, they have rejected a bipartisan way forward, a way in which we govern together. So that plan sits idle, Mr. President. It just sits to the side. All sides have tried other efforts, but they face the same problems. The Speaker, Speaker Boehner, and the President Obama sought to strike an alternative grand bargain as a way to address our structural deficits and debt to avoid default. And that looked pretty promising. But it appears to me that when the going got tough, the Speaker didn't stay at the table. And when it became apparent that the corporations and the wealthy would have to bear the responsibility for balancing the books, the House Speaker walked away. Another chapter unfolded. Things looked promising when the Vice President and the House Majority Leader tried to reach an agreement on a deficit reduction plan. But then when it became clear again that revenues had to be a part of the picture if we truly wanted to do something big and good for our country, they walked away from the table. Tax purity was more important than deficit reduction. Knowing that economists, Mr. President, market analysts and business leaders, credit rating agencies, world leaders, and the American people were imploring us to find an agreement to avoid default on our debt obligations, Democrats relented. We're now debating what the Republicans said they wanted, a spending cut-only plan. I can't tell you the depth of my disappointment that we couldn't pursue a truly comprehensive approach to reducing deficits and debt, one that would set the stage to continue growing our economy and create jobs. But in the name of compromise, I agreed that something versus nothing is better than default and further economic turmoil. But now it appears on a Saturday night, just a few hours from midnight, that even that's not enough. After putting together a plan that includes 100% of the Republican-endorsed spending cuts to avoid default, we are at an impasse. Again, we've got a plan here on the floor of the Senate that cuts $2.47 trillion from the federal budget without any revenue. Not a single tax loophole is closed, and yet we still can't get our House colleagues to help us prevent a first-ever default of the federal government. Mr. President, I've learned to not question motivations of my colleagues, but I have to ask myself, what is it that they want now in the House of Representatives? And they want exactly, it seems to me, what Bank of America, Standard & Poor's, J.P. Morgan Chase, Moody's, and other economic experts have warned us we can least afford. That is constant turmoil and dysfunction. They literally, whether they understand this or not, they want us to walk our economy, America's economy, the biggest economy in the world, right up to the cliff edge of default over and over again. The markets and business leaders have told us they want to increase investment, they want to create more jobs, they want to get our economy back on track. What they need is certainty. But it seems like there are those in the Capitol, in our Congress, that have decided that it's in their best political interest to create further confusion and uncertainty, exactly the opposite of what our markets and our business community are telling us. And this is the same members of Congress, the same individuals who ironically complain that our president hasn't done enough to create jobs or spur economic growth. And yet we're perilously close, and they're perilously close, to cutting off the economic growth we need to create jobs. Mr. President, in the interest of being direct, if we default, this would be an economic catastrophe of our own making. It's not something beyond our control, like a hurricane or an earthquake, a tornado, a drought. We can avoid the impending chaos and the job loss and the downgrading and of our retirement savings that's coming our way. And if we don't, it will be because some members of Congress were unwilling to take yes for an answer. Some members of Congress right now are unwilling to take yes for an answer. But let me begin to close my remarks on a little more optimistic note. I want to be really clear. There are members in both parties that are willing to be responsible. I was pleased to hear that Senator Alexander, the third-ranking Republican in the Senate, say what would be best, instead of having a Republican plan competing with a Democratic plan, would be to have the Speaker, Senator Reid, and Senator McConnell recommend to us a single plan. Senator Thune said yesterday, I think if you look at the basic framework, it wouldn't be that hard to figure out something that we could perhaps agree upon. I listened to Senator Isaacson and Senator Murkowski express similar thoughts earlier today. So I think there's real kernels here of optimism and a way forward. But for the life of me, I can't understand why we can't keep our focus on job creation in the global economic race. The rest of the world isn't waiting for us. They're on the march. I'm an old mountain climber in more ways than one, Mr. President, and I can tell you that I've learned that there's some similarities between attempting some of the world's highest peaks and work here in Washington, D.C. But the difference I found is that when the going gets tough here on Capitol Hill, it always seems like not only do you face the challenges the mountain presents, but there's a team of saboteurs who are trying to push and pull you off the mountain. And I really have to say that I believe if all of us would turn away from and frankly ignore the partisan campaign machines that are out there always churning, we could really get something meaningful done here. So the people of Colorado, from whom I take my instructions and to whom I listen, they have let it be known to me these last few days, and I think the rest of the nation probably feels this way. They don't care who wins politically. Frankly, I don't care who wins politically either. What I care about is passing legislation, meaningful legislation, long-term legislation that will stave off a government default and a downgrade in our nation's credit rating. Either of those outcomes are not acceptable. And at this point, Mr. President, the only plan, the only comprehensive plan, the only long-term plan that gets that done is the Reid plan. So let's focus on the Reid plan. I urge my colleagues to support the vote we're going to have, the historic vote we will have later this evening. Let's get it done. Let's get our country back on track. Let's win the global economic race. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor, and I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The senator from New Jersey.
I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, there are no easy answers to our current dilemma, but the Majority Leader's proposal is the best option we have to overcome the bipartisan impasse. Failure to increase the debt limit is not an option. Working families can't afford the increased costs associated with default, and seniors can't afford not to have their Social Security payments. In my time as a mayor, as a state legislator, as a member of the House of Representatives, and now as a senator, I have learned that there are times when one needs to stand and fight, and there are other times when one needs to reach a compromise. I'm not excited about the decisions we are being forced to make, but I think the Majority Leader has crafted a proposal that can bring the two parties together and avoid economic disaster without destroying Medicare, Social Security, and other priorities of working families. And if you compare that to Speaker Boehner's proposal, that is just more of the partisan gamesmanship and the path we have to take becomes clear. So I rise today in favor of the majority leader's plan in the hope that reason will prevail on the other side and that our Republican colleagues will finally agree to help govern and not make irrational demands that drive us down the road to default. Having said that, these debt negotiations have left America longing for a better time and a better government, a time when public service was, as Robert Kennedy said, a noble profession, when public servants served the public's interests, when they came together and found common ground and respected the opinions of those on the other side. My generation has always viewed public service as a noble profession and the fight for what we believe is right as a noble cause. But none of us should expect to win every battle. None of us should dismiss the valid beliefs of those whose politics we oppose, but who have been duly elected and sworn in to represent their state or their district. The Tea Party Republicans in the House seem to have forgotten that we live in a democracy. In a democracy, people hold different views, contrary but equally valid opinions. They approach problems differently from a different perspective, a different background, a different political view, and have differing views on the best solution. The art of governing is bridging those differences. Governing is finding common ground. Governing is what Ronald Reagan talked about in his autobiography, An American Life, when he spoke about the importance of political compromise. He understood that in a representative democracy, each of us has a right to our opinion, but not a right to our own way. President Reagan said, and I quote, "When I began entering into the give and take of the legislative bargaining in Sacramento," this is when he was governor, "a lot of the most radical conservatives who had supported me during the election didn't like it. Compromise was a dirty word to them, and they wouldn't face the fact that we couldn't get all of what we wanted today. They wanted all or nothing, and they wanted it all at once. If you don't get it," some said, "don't take anything." Sound familiar? It should. It is the view of today's radical Tea Party, the same view Ronald Reagan confronted. Reagan went on to say, quote, "I learned while negotiating union contracts that you seldom get everything you ask for. And I agreed with FDR, who said in 1933, 'I have no expectations of making a hit every time I come to bat. What I seek is the highest possible batting average. If you got 75 or 80% of what you were asking for, I say you take it and fight for the rest later.' And that's what I told these radical conservatives who never got used to it." Ronald Reagan, in his own words, a lesson from a conservative hero for those modern-day radical conservatives who has watched us walk 90 yards down the field but would rather move the goalpost than meet us at the 10-yard line. Ronald Reagan would tell them, grow up, step up, and govern. But they have reiterated the mantra of the radical conservatives Reagan faced: if you don't get it all, don't take anything. Edmund Burke, another conservative icon, once said something today's House Republicans would label as weakness or too liberal. He said, "Nobody made a greater mistake than he who did nothing because he could only do a little." House Republicans have chosen to do nothing. Edmund Burke understood the art of governing and the art of compromise. Ronald Reagan knew how radical conservatives think, how they negotiate, and now we are seeing how they stand in the way of governance and governing to maintain the purity of their ideology. Clearly, Democrats have offered much. We have offered the other side an opportunity to govern, and they have rejected it on ideological grounds. We've lived up to our duty to govern. They have lived up to Ronald Reagan's own view of radical conservative tactics and philosophy. I say to my friends, it is time to compromise and time to govern. Mr. President, I was shocked to witness the audacity of the House Republicans who stepped to the microphone this week, one by one, each claiming that if this nation defaults on its obligations, it will be the President's fault. Democrats have come a long way, and the Republicans know it. They just won't accept it. And they can't sell it to the American people because the American people know the truth. Everyone knows that the House Tea Party Republicans have rejected every proposal. They even rejected the Republican Speaker's original proposal. They claim to love democracy and freedom of speech only when it is their speech, only when it expresses their ideas and their beliefs. They claim to love our system of government, but clearly are at a war with the idea of governing and with all of those on this side who, I would respectfully remind them, have also been elected to serve just as they. They claim to embrace constitutional notions of tolerance and majority rule, but clearly see such notions as an inconvenient obstacle to getting their own way. They have the audacity to blame us for offering them what they want and then to claim we haven't offered enough. The fact is, with the plan the majority leader has put forth, Democrats are now offering exactly what the Republicans asked for, and yet they still will not take yes for an answer. They even claim that they are willing to compromise as long as it is within their framework, the framework of their original demands, that they will compromise on the kind of balanced budget amendment we pass, that they will only compromise on how deep the cuts to entitlements are, but they will not compromise on subsidies to big oil companies or billionaire tax cuts that wealthy Americans have themselves, though they've told us that they won't compromise on that. In effect, their only compromise is getting their own way and calling it compromise. Well, there is a difference between compromise and total capitulation. There must be common ground. They simply can't call for surrender. There's an old Scottish proverb that says, better bend than break. I say to my colleagues, we have done the bending, and now it's time to govern. I say to my colleagues, better bend than break, because in this case, it is our economic integrity that stands to break. It's time for the truth. It's time we look at the real impact on real people's lives if Republicans continue to stand firm, unwilling to bend, unwilling to compromise, unwilling to govern, but clearly willing to take America down the road to default. According to Secretary Geithner, the consequences for the nation and for millions in my home state of New Jersey would be deep and far-reaching. Failure to raise the debt limit, failure to allow Treasury to meet the obligations that the United States has already incurred would be the ultimate tax increase on every American. As such, surely it would violate the radical rights pledge to Grover Norquist, and make no mistake, it would be a tax increase. The no-compromise Republican tax increase would come in the form of increased interest rates, driving up the cost for every American family. The cost of mortgage payments would increase over $1,000 annually. Equity prices and home values would decline, which in turn would reduce retirement savings and affect the long and short-term economic security of every American. There would be reductions in spending and investments. Jobs would be lost, businesses would fail, credit card interest would increase, families would be paying more for gas, more for utilities, more for groceries. Based on J.P. Morgan's financial analysis during the debt ceiling and government shutdown debate in 1995 and the crisis in 2008, interest rates on Treasury bonds could conceivably rise 75 or even 100 basis points. Between mortgages and credit cards alone, an increase of 75 basis points would translate into an additional $10 billion in consumer borrowing costs every year, at a time when middle-class families can ill afford any increase at all in expenditures. And from an international perspective, default would have prolonged and disastrous negative consequences on the safe haven status of treasuries and the dollar's dominant role in international financial systems. It would reduce the willingness of investors here and abroad to invest in the United States. In my state of New Jersey, the impact of default would be immediate and all too real. Payments on a broad range of benefits, on other obligations, would either be postponed, limited, or discontinued. That includes military salaries and retirement benefits for 1,200 troops currently deployed from New Jersey, both active and reservists, and almost 500,000 veterans. Benefits for almost 1.5 million Social Security beneficiaries and 1.3 million Medicare enrollees would be interrupted. Student loan payments, Medicaid payments to states for seniors and the disabled in nursing homes, payments needed to keep critical government facilities operating, providing the services people need. The total for all these expenditures for New Jersey alone is $80 billion. $80 billion to New Jersey alone. That averages out to be about $26,000 per household in my state, putting a significant portion of the federal government's investment in New Jersey and its people at risk. And yet the Republicans of the House and many in this chamber will not bend, will not compromise, refuse to step up and govern. Their ideology demands that they protect entitlements for the most entitled Americans, big oil, corporate jets owners, and those who held the majority of the wealth in this nation. In my view, in my life, and in my work, I've come to understand how wrong they are. When the 400 richest Americans at the top hold more wealth than 150 million Americans at the bottom, we cannot simply put the burden on those who can ill afford it. Let's be clear. The Republican protection of the entitled class has nothing to do with balancing the budget or reducing the deficit, nothing to do with values, nothing to do with faith or cultural conservatism, nothing to do with community responsibility. It has everything to do with an extreme anti-government political agenda that is in fact anti-community. I believe we can do better for families, better for every American if we live and govern by the values we preach. During this process, those of us on this side of the aisle have held to the sociologist Max Weber, who once called the ethic of responsibility. House Republicans are pursuing what he called the ethic of ultimate ends. George Packer, in a recent New York article, said, "These ethics are tragically opposed, but the true calling of politics requires a union of the two. We on this side believe in ethical responsibility and doing what is right for the nation. Republicans have shown that they believe in one thing only, achieving their ultimate political end. And in this case, achieving that end means standing in the way of any compromise, even if it threatens to paralyze the nation's economy, even if it means rejecting the wisdom of their own hero, who understood the importance of compromise in the art of governance. I repeat what Reagan said. Compromise was a dirty word to them, and they wouldn't face the fact that we couldn't get all of what we wanted today. They wanted all or nothing, and they wanted it all at once. If you don't get it all, some said don't take anything. Well, Mr. President, it's time to realize that governing is not about getting it all or being ideologically pure. It's about getting it right for the American people. Let America understand that Reagan himself stood against those radical conservatives whose rigid adherence to ideology at the expense of reason is now taking us down the road to default. It is on them, and it is up to them to grow up, to step up, to compromise, as the American people have said in every poll. They want a balanced approach. That means a combination of significant spending cuts, but also revenues. If they accepted that, we could govern. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Michigan.
Mr. President, I would ask that I be yielded 10 minutes. I understand that although this is on the Republican time, that there is no objection to this.
Without objection.
Mr. President, whatever one's position is on the best way to cut the deficit, we all should be able to agree on this, that we must raise the debt ceiling, we must pay our bills. Failing to do so is to invite economic catastrophe. The American people have had their fill of catastrophe and near catastrophe. Recently in Afghanistan, Admiral Mullen, chairman of our Joint Chiefs, was asked by troops if they'll be paid next month. His answer was, "I honestly can't answer that question." Admiral Mullen had to tell the troops, "I'd like to give you a better answer than that right now. I just honestly don't know." Mr. President, it is inconceivable to me that we will leave our troops in limbo by driving our country over the cliff of default. Our nation's economic life is in peril. I don't remember ever in the 32 years that I've been here has our nation been more in need of deliberation, statesmanship, and compromise. New York Times columnist David Brooks, who is a conservative columnist, recently wrote that too many Republicans seem to have joined a movement, his word, in which, quote, the members do not accept the logic of compromise no matter what the terms, close quote. Well, I hope that some of our Republican colleagues will prove Mr. Brooks wrong on this matter because of its huge significance. The time for ignoring hard truths is over. Blind resistance to compromise may play well with some, but it is no way to solve hard problems or to govern. Drawing lines in the sand and issuing ultimatums may make for ringing sound bites, but no press release ever sent a child to college or gave a working family hope for a good job. If our Republican colleagues cannot bring themselves to support the majority leader's proposal, or at least to propose modifications to it, they can vote no. But it is unthinkable to filibuster against allowing the Senate an opportunity to vote on the Reid measure itself as this clock approaches midnight. It is one thing to vote against the Reid measure. It is quite another thing to deny the Senate, by filibustering, the opportunity to vote on the Reid measure when the issue is of such enormous importance. Now, last evening and again, the Republican leader, today again, the Republican leader said that they would insist on 60 votes to pass the Reid amendment. That is the definition of a filibuster threat. It's the very definition. You must have 60 votes. That is based on a threat to filibuster. Hopefully, some of our Republican colleagues will support Senator Reid's proposal. It has no new revenues. Its spending cuts match the size of the debt limit increase. Its cuts have been approved by leaders of both parties. But if our Republican colleagues don't seek to modify the Reid plan and won't vote for the plan, they at least should allow the Senate to vote on it and not to filibuster. Now, whether senators vote for or against the Reid legislation, the American people will not forgive a filibuster that prevents us from even voting on vital legislation as we rapidly approach a cliff. On the critically important matter now before us, there's going to be a very strong public reaction against those who, with economic calamity looming before us, deny the Senate through a threat of a filibuster and the filibuster itself an opportunity to vote on the Reid motion to concur. Now, compromise does not come easy with an issue such as this. But the people of this country did not elect us to do easy things. They elected us to seek practical solutions. They elected us to lead. The test of leadership in the Senate on the matter before us is allowing us to vote. Not to vote just on cloture, which is what the Republican leader suggests is a vote on the Reid motion. It is not. But to vote on the Reid motion itself. The test of leadership in this Senate is not to filibuster the Senate so we can't vote on the important Reid motion, but to allow us to proceed when that cloture motion is voted on. And so I call on Senate Republicans to offer changes to the Reid proposal or vote against it if you will, but not thwart the Senate majority from voting to adopt it, should they choose. When the cloture vote is voted on, if cloture is not invoked and the Senate is prevented from voting up and down on the Reid proposal, under our rules, debate on the Reid proposal will continue. The petition which we're going to vote on, I want to read so that everybody understands what we're voting on. We're not voting on the Reid motion to concur. We're voting on whether or not, and these are the words of the petition we're voting on, whether or not we will bring to a close the debate on that motion. Will we bring to a close the debate so we can vote on the Reid motion to concur in the House amendment. So voting against bringing debate to a close, thereby denying the majority the opportunity to act, does not defeat the majority leader's motion. It stalls. It stymies the Senate from acting. And if an end is not brought to debate when this cloture motion is voted on, the Reid motion is still the pending matter, and if the Republicans then are determined to filibuster against it and not allow us to vote on it, they, I believe, will see the wrath of this country brought down upon them.
Would the Senate